All right, Mr. Nels Kastberg is here with me, and I'll be talking to him a little bit about how can we address some situations that are before us in relation to adding some assistance to what we can do when it relates to getting ourselves out of the poverty level. Let me remind you that he has been invited here by the Anti Poverty Platform Group, the coordinators who uh, seek his assistance in providing some consultations, and we are happy to have him. He leaves on Wednesday, so before he leaves, we want to be able to make use of his wisdom and knowledge as it relates to his work around the world, having done so on the part of UNICEF and the United Nations, and of course, he sat on many a board of the UNICEF countries, wherever they are. He's best to tell you that anyway. But good afternoon to you, sir, and thank you for coming in.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Very happy to be with you and all your listeners.
And viewers as well.
And viewers.
There are those who are watching you, of course.
Yeah.
You're here, and of course, we realize that we have an acute situation that was accentuated by the unfortunate hurricane that struck us, and we are yet to get ourselves organized and back up. We're doing whatever little we can. But of course, we can do with every help there is. And you have been invited to come and address whatever assistance you can give to the anti-poverty platform. And you have identified some things that we need to do that I believe all my audience should hear, as well as those who are in authority. First off, can we get out of the situation that we're in terms of the poverty-stricken part?
Of course. There's nothing that hinders, particularly when you are a country with a relatively low population number. You, as I sometimes say, you can put name and surname to every problem in the island. And that's not just a way of saying, that is the reality. Sometimes we make a lot of provisions to receive a lot of tourism, for instance, and we are reconstructing very quickly so that we can receive tourists. But what are we doing to get our children and youth out of poverty? And that's part of what the anti-poverty platform wants to look at.
And that is important because we're talking about building back better.
Yes.
And in most people's minds, they would be thinking, all right, so we're putting the roof back on, we have to do it better. Or if we're going to construct a new building or one that has been completely demolished by the hurricane, we're going to do it stronger. But is anyone being left behind or anything else being left behind here when we focus only on that?
Well, firstly, you want to build back better, not only in terms of pure infrastructure. You also want to look at the mindsets, the way of thinking, how children are treated, whether they are listened to or not, and how you prepare for the next hurricane. Those are some of the elements that go beyond the purely physical. And we know that that type of thing is extremely important, for the future of a child and how that child develops. And you want to avoid children and youth running into troubles down the line because they lack a sense of what's the meaning in life, and so on. If they feel that life doesn't have a meaning, if they feel that there isn't any hope, I will not be able to get a job, that type of hopelessness is an easy road or avenue to get into drugs, to get into all sorts of risky behavior that we want to avoid. So the other thing is, we know for a fact all over the world that between 15 and 25 years of age, it's the largest number or percentage of young people that are out of work or out of school all over the world. Now, we need to have data on that in St. Martin. If you look at 25 to 35, or the age group 35 to 45, or 45 to 55, they have much higher levels of employment than the age group 15 to 25 that should be either in school or working. Now, obviously, we don't want them normally working. We would prefer that they are studying. But if you look at it, strictly speaking, how many are out of school, out of work, it's a very, very high percentage. And that's actually the age where you wanted them every day to be doing something. Studying, learning, or working, or learning a vocation, or whatever.
Yeah. And if that's not happening...
And that, in most countries of the world, they make the same mistake. They don't focus sufficiently on that age group. That's very important for St. Martin to look at. Now, when we go back before the hurricane, were there pending issues before the hurricane? Because whatever was pending before the hurricane becomes worse after the hurricane. Now, if the Netherlands and St. Martin are part of a number of conventions. Those conventions include the Convention on Human Rights and the one on the Convention on the Rights of the Child, for instance. Now, once you are part of a convention, you're supposed to report every 5 years. The last time that the Netherlands and St. Martin reported on this was 2015, which means to the Convention on the Rights of the Child, the committee.
Okay.
And you know what the committee told St. Martin and the Netherlands? Said, you have inequality between the Netherlands and the Caribbean part. You should work at establishing equality. You have specific paragraphs that are telling you you should be getting better data. You don't have data on children, sufficient data, that is disaggregated, sufficiently by geographical area and different important factors that are important to look at. So already before the hurricane, the Human Rights Council and its treaty bodies, as it's called, were making a lot of recommendations to St. Martin that were not being paid attention to.
And this is by who? St. Martin or the Netherlands?
St. Martin and the Netherlands.
Okay, good.
And to me, coming from Sweden, I'm not an expert. That's what local people need to sort out. And that's what the anti-poverty platform will try to work and negotiate and discuss and whatever. But the unequal status between a child in The Hague and a child in Philipsburg, that inequality predates 10-10-10. It predates Irma, of course. It predates 10-10-10. And goes back, you can see some of these recommendations going back to 2003.
Wow.
Now, who is financially responsible for the legacy part? Should be the Netherlands. Because those were things that they didn't implement before 10-10-10. Now, after 10-10-10, I'm not a constitutionalist, so I cannot say how much is the responsibility of the government here in St. Martin, how much is the responsibility of the kingdom. But what the human rights treaty bodies are telling the kingdom is, guys, you can't have this huge difference between a child growing up on the mainland and a child growing up in the island. You can't be paying a certain type of social support on the mainland and a different type of social support in Ceiba or Statia or here. You should have a greater equality. Now, you have self-determination in terms of you yourselves working out locally what is the best way of reaching that equality. Now, who should be financially responsible? That's the part that I cannot tell you. It has to be worked out. However, I think it's very important for a state to recognize if I want to be a state, then I have to protect all those living in my territory.
Yes.
Because otherwise, you are, as I sometimes say, a banana republic. You are there just to permit some people to do some trade and make some money and exploit everybody the best way they learn. That's not a real state.
Okay.
No? That's a banana republic.
That responsibility seems that lies with us at this point.
Yes. At this point, you need to ensure, or at least to find out, if we have this many children and so many of them are living in poverty, what is it we need to do so that we have a floor of rights, the St. Martin's floor of rights. And obviously there you need to not only rely on consultants that come from abroad, you need to rely on your own people. That's why working with the university, with the trade unions, with faith people, etc., that's the local people.
Yeah.
And they are the ones that need to come to a realization. It's not acceptable that some of our children are living under these type of conditions. So then you can get ideas as to how to improve the situation for them. The second is, so you have a set of recommendations that you already have received for the past 20 years and that have not been implemented. And then you need to identify what are the resources that we're allocating in the social sectors that benefit the children and the youth, and identify whether that is sufficient or not. You know that if you're spending less than a certain amount per child per day, you cannot have good health, or you cannot have good education services and so on. Generally, in terms of education, St. Martin's is investing reasonably, but I think it's the content of the education that needs to be looked into. To give you some examples, firstly, how are you teaching? Now, that varies, but in some cases, I think it's reasonable. In other cases, it's more you have to learn by memory type of situation. And actually, you want a child to be thinking through how he or she can find out information, etc. There are different ways of trying to teach a child, and I think that part is very important. But also, how does the teacher view himself or herself in relation to the child? All children learn best by seeing the passion in their teacher. Now, if the teacher sees herself or himself as a dictator that tells the child, you do this, you do this, you do the homework, study this for tomorrow, etc., or a teacher that transmits a sense of passion. All studies around the world show that the most important factor for quality of education is not how beautiful the building is, if it has air conditioning, if it has a proper desk, but the passion of the teacher. So you need to have, transmit that passion.
But isn't that also something in addition to the content of the education as well?
Yes, because, and that's why I think the anti-poverty platform needs to look at building coalition with trade unions of teachers and so on, because this is not something that the government alone can resolve.
Yes. Yeah.
You need to involve different. For instance, if people in the church are saying, spare the rod spoils the child, what they are doing is they are promoting physical violence in the home. Why do I say this? Because Proverbs in the Bible talks 5 times about the use of the rod. Now, if you look at David, King David, when he was a shepherd, he used a rod. What did he use the rod for?
To steer.
Exactly.
Yeah.
To steer and guide the sheep. That's why they comfort me, he says in Psalm 23. Thy staff and thy rod,
They
they
comfort me.
comfort me. Because we sometimes don't know how to move in life. And we feel that his guidance is very important. Well, that's how David used the rod to guide the sheep. Because he had to take them from place A to place B along very dangerous,
Slopes.
narrow, slopes. And you know, if one sheep moves off, the others follow it.
Yes.
So you have to make sure that they stay on the path.
So the rod was not really beating the sheep,
No.
but steering.
Imagine if King David would beat the sheep with the rod. Where would the sheep go? All over the place. And that's what's happening with our youth. They are going all over the place.
So what would be the best interpretation of a rod, if you could just clear it up for
Guide.
us?
In fact, even they were supposed to put the names of the family so that when you transmitted the rod from one generation to the other, you had the name of your predecessors. Look even at Moses. Moses on one occasion was told, speak to the rock. Instead of speaking to the rock, what did he do?
He hit the rock.
He hit the rock twice. He used violence instead of dialogue. What was the punishment?
He never got a chance to see the promised land.
Exactly. He never got a chance to get into the promised land. And he tried so many times. God, forget what I did just once. No. You used violence instead of dialogue. You don't get in.
So, for clarity here then,
Yes.
for the good of our listeners' understanding, that the rod should not be interpreted as something to beat a child with when it's referred to in the Bible, but rather a guide.
Yeah. And discipleship and discipline are intimately related.
Yeah.
And what many have done is they have mixed up discipline with violence. And the two cannot be as far from each other as possible. And you know how you best discipline a child? Through good discipleship. What is discipleship? If you look at social sciences today, they can show you, even at the stage of a baby, that a baby learns better by seeing the example than by what you tell them. In fact, everybody here in St. Martin learned at least 1 or 2 languages before the age of 2 without going to a single school. How did they learn it? By example, by seeing others use the language. So discipleship and discipline are intimately related. You show through your example
Demonstration.
how you should walk, how you should do.
Yeah.
Now when Matthew 18 talks about, you making a child stumble, how do you make a child stumble? When you tell them one thing but you do something else. That makes a child stumble. Because they can't understand. You're saying something but you're doing something else.
But these type of information or education being shared, especially when we talk about the disparity between the children that may be residing in the Netherlands versus those that are residing in England. Are these principles being taught and advanced in the Netherlands?
Well, in the Netherlands, they use a secular approach. So they say you don't beat your child.
Yeah.
And they have laws about it and so on. But with persons of faith, you need to start from where they believe. And here in the Caribbean, 80% of the population go to a church. Not in the Netherlands, but here they do. So you need to start with where they believe. And do they believe in Scripture or not? The problem is when you are following a tradition instead of following the example of Jesus. When you are following your custom and trying to squeeze your custom and tradition into the Bible, that's wrong. When you look at how, for instance, Jesus attacked his own disciples, one of the few times that he got really angry was 4 times he got angry. One of them was when his disciples didn't let the kids come to him. And he was, indignant, the Bible says, about this. So when they came, he took them in his arms. That is, he gave them a hug. How many fathers give a hug every day to their child? In fact, there are many families that don't even have a dad. The dad is disappeared. The mother is like a widow. And the child is therefore an orphan. Now, secondly, it says, he put his hand on them. What does that mean? He was caressing them. You know that the latest in research shows you that probably the reason for sudden death of babies is because of lack of touch. They are being left in a cot, etc. And they talk about this sudden death of babies in their baby cot. And they think that the principal reason might be the lack of touch. Now we have the good touch and the bad touch. Here we're talking about the good touch. So you need to start early with the good touch. It then says, and he blessed them. And how did he bless them? Looking out the other way or looking at their eyes? If you're blessing a child, you're looking at the child's eye. Yeah. You know what the eye contact time is today around in the world? 11 minutes a day in a very good family. The time that a father looks into his child's eye and talks to him or to her is around 11 minutes a day. And it's decreasing.
Yeah. So we are not doing enough to help our children, and on top of that, let me just share this with you. I have to take a break, but let me just share this with you, and I want you to think about this. Because one of the things that we quickly find on St. Maarten is that parents have to occupy themselves with more than one job, which disallow them from having enough time to deal with their children. And all of it is to be able to survive and lift themselves out of this poverty, if you want to call it that they're going through, and it becomes necessary that they do this. So then, is that something you have to play a role with when it comes to us being able to get out of poverty? I want you to think about that and probably answer that on our way back in. But allow me to take a break here. I do have to get our commercials in. And then when we come back, we'll continue to speak with Nils Kastberg, who is here with me from UNICEF. We'll be right back. And welcome back to Viewpoint for today. I'm here with Mr. Katzberg, and of course we're talking to him. Primarily all that has been said, and we will continue to say, has to do with what are some of the things needed or we need to do or look at if we're going to lift those people in our community who we would consider are in poverty out of poverty. And my question to him at the start was, can we really do that? And he said to me, yes, we can. And I would be happy one day to read in the papers or maybe hear a broadcast about the government committing themselves to a percentage of the people in poverty be lifted out of poverty by the end of a specific time. But when I think of all that has to go into this, it seems like it's a lot. And I notice, Mr. Katzberg, as I bring you back in, that you couple a lot of what you're saying with spiritual stuff from the scriptures. What is the relation?
Well, for starters, I think when it comes to social sciences, the Bible is much more advanced. Already
More advanced than
much more advanced than social science. If anything, social sciences are proving that the Bible was right already 2,000 years ago.
so
I was
that's why
giving
you
you
often,
the example, you know, I was giving you the example of how Jesus treated children.
Yes.
That was not the common attitude on how they treated children. And still him, as a master, was showing you hug a child. You caress the child. You speak positive things to the child. You look the child in the eye. And all of these social science shows you how important the touch is for a child. For instance, if you don't hug your child between 0 and 10 years of age, when the child becomes a teenager, the first person that hugs this child when he leaves the house, he will feel how wonderful. And is that necessarily the best person to hug your child? Is that person hugging your child because he or she wants to steal the body of your child for sexual abuse? A child that received all this love between 0 and 10 is so much better protected than a child that didn't receive. Now, look at the question of looking into the eye and speaking positive things, blessing. We use a Christian word, blessing. That means speak good things that build you up. How much of the 11 minutes a day, which social sciences show us, is the average time that the father is spending with his child? Which to me is too little. We should do more. Still, of those 11 minutes, how many of those minutes do we look at them with love? Or is it to tell them you did something wrong? How much of that time are we using to speak things that build up our child? Now, social sciences and the government cannot accuse you for not speaking good things. Still, they are recognizing in social sciences how important it is to build the self-confidence of your child. But this already the Bible was telling you 2,000 years ago. And the first ones that are not living up to this are the disciples. That's why Jesus was indignant with his disciples. And every generation of disciples needs to read this verse. This is not something for 2,000 years ago. This is written for us today to think through how are we making Jesus indignant?
How can one who is under a tremendous amount of pressure take all this in as to what type of social relations he or she need to have with the child for the child to really benefit? And I guess you're concentrating more on what we need to do for the children who would be tomorrow's future. But the parents are under a tremendous amount of pressure. On going to the break, I mentioned that this kind of pressure they are on is disallowing them from doing what they need to do. They often look to government and maybe to the church and maybe these organizations, the schools, to play that role.
Yeah, well, firstly, obviously, we're not washing away the responsibility of the government. But we have 4 environments that need to function better for the children, to protect the children. And one is the home, secondly the school, thirdly the institutions where they might find themselves, and fourthly the public arena, and that means the government. There are a number of things that the government alone cannot resolve. That's why we need some type of platform that will work again, so that everybody that needs to contribute should be contributing. So we need to identify what's the minimum that the government should be investing. I can give you some examples of, firstly, if a government doesn't invest sufficient in the budget, then you're not going to get better results. You're not going to take people out of poverty. Now, if you want to spend something, you have to also have an income, taxation.
Yes.
Now, if, for instance, your hotels come and establish themselves without paying taxes for 5 years, let's say, so that they have an incentive to come here. After 5 years, many of them change name.
Usually
so that
it's
they
10
can
years,
have
yes.
so that they can have another 5 years. Well, that's stealing. I'm sorry. That's stealing. And if you have corporations, however big those hotel corporations are, if all they want is to come and steal the money of your children, then you tell them, don't come back. Because St. Maarten has a beauty. There will always be an honest hotel company that is interested in coming here. So don't go and look for those. It's a little bit like Amazon.com that decided not to build their headquarters in New York. They were supposed to receive $3 billion in incentives. And a lot of people started protesting. How are you going to give $3 billion to the guy that already has $100 billion in his bank account? What's the sense of that? So again, I'm not saying in one way or the other when it comes to the New York example, but I'm saying in the context here, you have to have a certain income. And you can't allow companies to continue cheating on the income to the St. Martin's government, because then you will not have sufficient resources to invest in your children.
Correct.
Now, the government alone cannot resolve issues. Then there are the issues of corruption. Generally in the region, we have a lot of problems with corruption. And everybody can contribute to stop corruption. Now, I don't believe in the older people. I think they got used to corruption being a fact of life. So I think we have to trust on the young people to start being the eyes and the ears, and whenever they hear about corruption, they should shout about it and say, stop this, etc., etc. Because otherwise we're not going to overcome it. So that's in the public arena, two examples of things.
Yeah.
But then in the schools, how do we teach the children? That passion of the teachers is extremely important. I think you need a multilingual school, because generally you're having schools that either follow a Dutch model or an American model. Those are two big monolingual countries. But the Caribbean is a multilingual environment.
Yes.
Everybody learns, in the end, 4 or 5 languages. So your education system should be multilingual. That doesn't mean you are studying a number of languages. You actually teach in different languages. My daughters couldn't speak French, couldn't speak English. They went to a bilingual school in Geneva. Within 3 months, they spoke fluently English and French. But it's not that they studied English or French. My eldest daughter had a teacher that taught her in mathematics in French. Still to this day she continues counting in French, although she lives in Sweden.
I see.
And my youngest daughter, she was taught to count mathematics by an English teacher. So she still counts in English. You can learn different subjects from somebody. What's important is that it's their mother tongue.
Yeah.
So that's one example of multilingual society. There are many other examples
Yeah.
of what can be done in the school. And then the home we talked about,
Yeah.
how we behave
And
with
then
the
you
kids.
have the church as well. And these are
Exactly.
lots, and we are running out of time. I want to know from you, sir, where does data play a role in all this? Because I think that is important. I remember when Mr. Jessamine was here, he mentioned that we have some 90% of our people in poverty. But I don't think he has any accurate figures to show for it, because when you look at it literally, he's saying basically that 90% of the people are poor, while 100%, 10% of them are rich. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, well, what I can say is that the human rights treaty bodies have been asking you for 20 years to have better data
Yeah.
and disaggregated data down to the local level.
But this came through the Netherlands anyhow.
Yes,
They know about this request
Yes.
because of our state.
absolutely.
So they play a role here as much as we do.
Absolutely. They should have been making sure that equal rights applied in the Caribbean as it
it is
applied in... You
the-
cannot be treated a suburb of The Hague differently from a suburb in St. Martin or in Ceiba or in Statia.
And more so Sabre and Station.
Even more because those
they
are
part-
municipalities.
Yes, yeah.
Now, a lot of these things date back from before 10.
Yeah.
So therefore, there is a historical lack of equality that dates back to before you became an independent country.
Yeah, and I don't want to just spend too much time there because we're out of time. But I want to say, what about the responsibility that we have now, where, and I'm referring to St. Martin, Curacao, and Aruba, who actually are states within this constellation
Within
of
the
the Dutch
kingdom.
Kingdom. Yeah. What responsibility do we have to ourselves if we're looking at ourselves as states, as we are in the kingdom?
Well, again, it's in those four environments where you need to improve. At home, improve how you relate to the child. In school, how you teach them. In institutions such as a church, they should be protected. And in the public square, the government has to invest more. How much they have to invest more, you have to compare, you have to identify, but if you're going to invest more, you need more income. So you need to look at the income stream. Who is avoiding taxes? Who is trying to skip paying taxes? Because that is stealing from the children.
But what about, isn't there responsibility to as well, and accountability to those people who are responsible for the budget, the Minister
Absolutely.
of Finance?
Absolutely.
Because when you entrust him with plenty of money, the result should show in the community.
Yes, and that's where this anti-poverty platform, for instance, needs to identify where are all the social budget lines
Yes,
going,
yeah,
how is it used,
And how much
is
is
it
it?
achieving the results,
And how
and
much
so on.
it is.
Yes, how much it is exactly. In Paraguay, for many years, they have had a project that monitors every quarter how much money from the Ministry of Finance was transferred to the social sectors. They were the ones that came out not long ago with a report. The Ministry of Health has not been able to buy essential medicines because Ministry of Finance didn't transfer the money. So they came out public with this.
Okay.
Within 2 days, the Ministry of Finance transferred the money and the Ministry of Health was able to put, the orders for essential drugs. So again, civil society
Accountability.
can be involved in ensuring accountability of the use of public resources.
All right. So there is hope. We can get out of this.
Oh, totally.
But you're saying government would have to, if they're going to raise the amount of money they spend for social services and whatever social aspect in our development, they would require more money. So they would have to look at where they can get more money, obviously that would be taxes.
Yes.
And
Who
maybe,
is not paying taxes today?
and who is not paying taxes? So compliance to that
Absolutely.
obligation as well is something that needs.
But
to
if you don't keep eyes on the government, they are not going to change.
Hi, I'll let that be the final word. You have come to St. Martin. What was your striking discovery? What did you notice that alarms you the most?
That so much of this has been said by the human rights bodies for 20 years, and I don't think that many here in St. Martin have ever read what the human rights bodies were telling St. Martin since 20 years ago. You have it all there.
Who is in possession of all this?
You can enter the website OHCHR, which means Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. So OHCHR. And then you go into the human rights treaty bodies.
Is that the .com or?
Yeah, it's you click there.
Yeah.
And then it will show you all the different committees.
Yeah.
And you look at the Committee on the Rights of the Child. You click on that one, you can see everything that they have been writing to you for the past 20 years.
Yeah. So also we as a government have our responsibility, especially in light of us being entrusted with the new status of a state within the kingdom.
And I would hope in future that even though you are a kingdom, I think it's about time that Aruba, Curacao, and St. Martin start writing their own separate reports on the rights of the child.
Okay.
And we need to sort out the kingdom responsibility and the state responsibility of Aruba, Curacao, and St. Martin. Because now it's kind of falling in between chairs. Who is supposed to ensure equality?
Yeah.
Now, I don't mind that by St. Martin being part of the kingdom, there should be equality between what happens on the mainland and in the island.
Yeah.
And we need to sort out, okay, if the state of St. Martin cannot fully finance this, what is the responsibility of the kingdom to ensure that equality?
Very good. Thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
You have been so enlightening, and I think my listeners and viewers did in fact benefit from all that you have to offer. Thank you once again.
Thank you.
Mr. Katzberg.